Day 848 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 531,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,080 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 14 tanks, 35 APVs, and 54 artillery. And on the topic of tanks, we see a general decline of the percentage of Russian T-72 tanks getting destroyed in the field, which is interesting given that out of all the tanks Russia has, or had, at its disposal, Russia was always expected to have at least 2 to 3 times the amount of these tanks than their next closest tank, either the T-62s or the T-80s. And so, as we can see at the onset of the war right here, nearly 70% of all tanks destroyed were T-72s, which is a figure that has now dwindled down to less than half at about 31%. With the slightly newer T-80 tanks and slightly older T-62 tanks replacing them. So with an incredible percentage drop like that, the Russian army's mainstay tank is seemingly slowly but surely vanishing from the battlefields. Then headed to the map and starting out in Russia in what almost feels like deja vu, as in the early hours of this morning, multiple districts in Russia's Krasnodar territory, including Temrak, Yesk, and Seversky, came under coordinated drone attacks striking key infrastructure. For instance, one such flurry of drones targeted the Yesk military airfield, igniting a large fire according to Russian media reports. Local residents also confirmed the blaze, though authorities have yet to provide detailed comments. Plus, NASA's firm's satellite heat map data indicates that the adjacent air defense training center is burning. And given what appears to be precisely localized pinpoint accuracy on the site, it seems to be a very deliberate choice of target for the AFU. Also, we saw some of the effects of drone attacks that ignited a significant fire at the Ilya oil refinery in Seversky, with the attack on the refinery causing a 50 square meter fire according to preliminary police reports. But also, as it so happens, the port of Azov, that oil depot fire from earlier this week, is still burning for a third consecutive day after a Ukrainian drone attack, with once again NASA's firm's satellite data also showing the same. And there were numerous other reports just today of one-way UAV attack drones into various Russian territories, as we see that Ukraine has no intentions of letting up, as the attacks remain consistent and intense, with what almost feels like unfettered access by Ukraine to Russia's critical infrastructure. Then, speaking of air defenses, because in a Napa of the Krasnodarian territory as well, have to zoom in, so there it is, as Russian air defenses appear unbeatable, but there is nuance. As we saw a Russian telegram report on a friendly fire incident between their own Pantsir air defense system and their own Ka-29 helicopter. However, from a hardware losses point of view, incidents like these will never be counted and displayed from the officially published General Staff's record. All because it happened on Russian lands and Ukraine never got the chance to do it themselves. Then we'll head across to the Ukrainian map today, and we'll start out in the northeast as the Ukrainian 36th Separate Marine Brigade were seen clearing out Russian positions just east of Vovchansk. And the green circle here is the likely location of that event. Also, newly geolocated footage showed further advances of Ukrainian forces inside of Vovchansk, which, by the way, has not at all helped the Russian personnel that are still desperately trying to unblock the aggregate plant and its grey zone encirclement. That's undoubtedly a tough place to be in. And specifically, they'd like to reconnect with the west from where they came, but in order to reconnect to the larger Zerglin horde, they would need assistance from said horde from across the former pathway that used to be right there. Then also, and somewhat related to this front, as Recent news announced now shows that Ukrainian troops have been given the green light to use US weapons to strike Russian targets if those forces launch cross-border assaults on Ukrainian territory. With the permission not only limited to areas near the Kharkiv Oblast border, but also extends to any region where Russian attacks originate. In other words, if Russia chooses to launch incursions into anywhere in the north into Chernihiv or Sumy as well, all the way to Kharkiv, they can now expect a swift response. So, up front, any hypothetical new Russian incursion would mean they'd be fighting on a much more even playing field against Ukraine. So, a newly added deterrence. But having said all that still, it's difficult to account for poor decision making from the Russian army. Anything goes. Then headed a bit further southeast on the map, as Russian forces continue to run some heavy attempts to push forward on this almost salient-like point northwest of Asheratana, with theoretically the goal of reaching the T-504, and to do so as a way to disrupt a Ukrainian main road behind the front lines that's used to support the army. Although to get there, the Russian forces cannot just continue a narrow push across the fields to the highway, which is about 8 kilometers from the front line tip, as doing so would leave them too exposed to multiple vectors of attack from artillery fire of the Ukrainian forces. Instead, Russian forces would need to expand their front more horizontally, but that would actually mean they would need to take an extra 100 square kilometers of land adjacent to their existing furthest locations in order to make a more discernible impact to achieve such a goal. So certainly a bridge too far at the moment, and in some cases I mean literally, because of all the water bodies and river networks that they would then have to contend with. Then looking around on the map, because somewhere in the east, the 15th Operational National Guard destroyed a Russian BMP-2 with truly a Hollywood-style explosion. Then we saw a skilled FPV drone operator of the Trophy Hunters unit destroy a Russian T-80 BVM tank. Then we saw how a Russian OSA air defense system tries to shoot down a reconnaissance drone, then an FPV hits the OSA, which ironically is the reason why the recon drone was monitoring in the first place. Then we also saw a Russian tank destroyed, with the resulting turret toss distance on display being fairly unimpressive. And then we'll head across to some news for today. So, German arms manufacturer Rheinmetall announced receiving a landmark contract from the Bundeswehr, worth up to 8.5 billion euros for 155mm artillery ammunition. This order, the largest in the company's history, aims to restock German military arsenals and support Ukraine amid ongoing Russian aggression. Now, since Russia's full-scale invasion, Ukraine has transitioned towards the NATO standard 155mm artillery shells, moving away from Soviet calibers like the 122 and 152mm due to supply shortages. As such, this shift has driven significant demand for 155mm shells, as we already know, and as such, underscoring Rheinmetall's crucial role as a leading ammunition supplier. Now, currently, in total, Europe is able to collectively produce up to 85,000 NATO shells a month, which translates to an annual capacity of approximately 1 million shells, although this latest Rheinmetall deal should eventually see Europe collectively be able to produce approximately 2 million shells per annum or more. Then in some more news, Germany is reportedly considering transferring the new Nomads air defense system to Ukraine. This highly mobile Norwegian-made short-range air defense system utilizes IRIS-T or AIM-9X Sidewinder missiles to effectively counter a wide range of aerial threats, including drones, helicopters, and low-flying aircraft. According to the German security and defense policy media outlet Hardpoint, the German government is evaluating this potential support for Ukraine, as they have already provided 3 Patriot air defense systems. And so this is where we should really cut Germany some slack, because had Germany not taken a more defensive supply approach to military equipment for Ukraine, then Ukraine would have far fewer air defense systems available to them now, not forgetting all the Gepards, the RST, and the Skynet systems that Germany has also sent to Ukraine. Then headed across to a little bit of Russian economy news as Russia struggles to meet Putin's goal of 1,000 domestically produced civilian travel aircraft by 2030 due to Western sanctions. So the original plan allocated roughly $17 billion to manufacture 1,036 planes using only Russian components. However, production fell far short, with only 2 aircraft built in 2023 and 1 so far in 2024. Unsurprisingly, the plan has now been revised down to 994 aircraft by 2030. But even that is still ridiculously far-fetched. And I mentioned this story when the initial news first broke in December last year. And I still hold very low expectations now for this project, as I did back then. So let's say, hypothetically, Putin is still in power in 2030, this goal will not be reached, and as per usual, Putin will have long since moved the goalpost much further out to, say, 2037 or something similar, and also successfully deny ever having set the goal of 2030, due to his control over the media within the country. Because he's flat out denied numerous missed goals in the past, on other such topics, and it's worked out pretty well for him so far. Then, in some more compelling news, new Russian Defense Minister Belousov visited the construction site of barracks for naval infantry in the Far East, issuing stern warnings of criminal consequences if the project isn't completed on time. Also, Belousov's remark of, quote, "people will be coming back soon," has raised questions about the intended occupants. So perhaps it's to strengthen their eastern front as part of some standard national security endeavors, or is it to receive in those from the east, such as private Chinese military contractors, or those from North Korea, to undergo basic training then deploy them to Ukraine? But I do wonder, even after Putin's recent visit to North Korea, how many citizens would North Korea be willing to part with for this cause? 5,000? 10,000? Either way, since Russia isn't able to make the extremely unpopular decision of a mass mobilization and destroying their economy in the process, they're looking to hedge their bets other ways and scrape from the bottom of the barrel to get any extra manpower they can. Come to think of it, probably training African soldiers as well, because in another Russian military mobilization blunder segment, so here we have it, Adil, a Somali mercenary captured in Ukraine, provided a candid account of his experience and the broader situation of foreign recruitment by the Russian army. His revelations shed light on the deceptive practices and harsh realities faced by foreign fighters. Adil explained that obtaining a Russian tourist visa is straightforward, often taking just a week. Then, upon arrival, advertisements for the military are ubiquitous, they're just found everywhere. Though many foreigners initially mistake them for security jobs from the way the advertisements are portrayed. And so, as you might expect, promises of a passport and substantial pay lure individuals like Adil who envisioned a prosperous future. However, the specifics of deployment are often vague. Adil was not informed whether he would be stationed at the front or remain in Russia. Plus, the motivation for fighting in Ukraine was never explained, leaving him confused about the conflict's parties and purpose. It was also said that training these recruits is minimal, lasting as little as a few weeks. Adil then recounted how they were quickly sent to the front lines, describing the experience as hell. So injuries received no medical attention and survival was left to fate, with no effort to preserve the lives of injured soldiers. This is not the professional Russian army. Then headed across to a couple of quick funnies to round it all off for today, guys. And I have to start off with getting a couple of extra Kim Jong-un and Putin moments out of my system still, because Kim presented a portrait to Putin when he visited, and it looked like a deceased person. And in fact, looks like something that can go on a tombstone. And look at the expression on Kim's face. Like a forceful dictator expecting you to like what you see. Although, not like one, just is one. Best gift ever. Thanks, Kim. Then after that, Putin headed straight to Vietnam, where Putin was also presented with another dark portrait in the form of a shadow cast depiction. I've got to tell you, none of this seems like a good omen. Unfortunately, Putin's reaction was not shown. But we do see how Putin is pursuing a coalition of friendlier states with historically warmer ties to the Soviet Union to act as an alternative to the West and the current world order. Although safe to say that most countries globally have seen the economic fallout effects of getting into bed with Putin. It's just not worth it. Then, in a final oddity of a funny, so Russian propagandists were extremely excited about how developed North Korea was during their visit, stating that North Korea has taxis, they have roads, and the reporters were even gleeful about receiving special phones with internet access, but the phones were later taken away and undoubtedly were tracking their every movement. I even enjoyed how host Skybeva said, quote, "Indeed a live broadcast from the capital of the supposedly underdeveloped DPKR. Never mind that Pyongyang is very well known for its seriously strict government control over its residents. But apart from that, hey, you've got yourself a fantastic holiday destination." Which, by the way, the Russian government and their media has been pushing as a location for its citizens to holiday at. No thank you. Just imagine if your own country was pushing for you to do some holiday travel in North Korea. But hey, this is Russia in 2024. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. I appreciate all of your support and I hope to see all of you there in the next one. Cheers.